Meeting going, I just wanted to say to everybody at home who's listening with keen interest. So we had quite a bit of discussion about what to do in regards to council meetings and the current COVID-19 situation, but our position is that the business needs to continue and council meetings will proceed using best practices for social distancing. That may change, as so many things have, but members of the public are encouraged to watch online rather than attending in person. And if anybody is watching at this moment, you'll see that we've rearranged council chambers to provide more distance between each of us. And in general, council meetings will encourage people to sit further apart than in the past. With that, looking to the agenda, I'll call the meeting to order. Are there changes to the agenda? Ms. DeSoto.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Barrowman. There are a few changes to the agenda. Unfortunately, the first delegation, B1, J. Famiglietti from the University of Saskatchewan, he was unable to travel due to the health crisis. And items D1 and D2, our presenters are unable to make it here today. So we'd like to amend the agenda by removing item B1. And for items D1 and D2, we will not have presenters, but if council would like to ask some questions, we can make note of those questions and make sure we get you those answers before the end of the week.
Thanks very much. So with that, I'll move that the agenda be approved as amended. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. We do have two delegations, and the first up is Mr. Heuer from Parks Canada to give us a little update on the Bison Reintroduction project. Welcome back to Council, Karsten.
Great. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Council, for your time today. And thanks to Cheryl. She and I had a lot of back and forth to figure out a date, so good persistence, Cheryl. Yeah, we're at the halfway mark of our Bison Reintroduction project in Banff National Park. I continue to work as the project manager for that. And I just thought at that halfway point, the 2.5-year mark, is a great time to come and share what we've learned to date with you. So this is really intended for information only, but I'm happy to honor any questions afterwards. I just thought I'd start by reviewing why we're even undertaking this, and there's a lot of archaeological evidence for the presence of bison in the area that is now Banff National Park from over 140 years ago and stretching right back to at least 2,700 years. And that has been unearthed through just about all kinds of excavation projects, whether it's in downtown Banff or along the Fortis transmission line. And most recently, and I'll talk about this right at the end, the bison, the reintroduced bison themselves are actually unearthing some of the evidence of their ancestors, which is a neat full circle. And then Parks Canada, as you know, our mandate is for what we call the maintenance and improvement of ecological integrity, which is really just a fancy term for saying the health of the ecosystem. And we know that bison have been missing for over 150 years, and they are a critical piece of the ecosystem. So really our intent is not necessarily to just reintroduce a missing species. It's actually to bring back those ecological processes of which they played a crucial role. And then finally, there's been a lot of interest, and a lot of the reward for me has been in reconnecting people with this pretty incredible animal. And that's encompassed groups from Indigenous groups to non-Indigenous. And we're certainly continuing to see an upswing in interest and enthusiasm for this project as we go along. So just a brief overview, we did extensive consultation in the years leading up to us getting hooves on the ground in 2017. And really, you know, we sensed a bit of trepidation out there, which is not which is very understandable given that, this is North America's largest land mammal, and it hasn't lived in this landscape in any of our lifetimes. So we committed to starting small and going slow. We also committed to it being a reversible 5-year pilot, and then rather than start in a place like the busy Bow Valley here, we decided we were going to start in the remote backcountry. So this slide shows the reintroduction zone, the dark green blob within the context of Banff National Park, which is outlined in green. And then, of course, we're sitting here, right here today. So it's about 40 kilometers straight line distance north up the Cascade Valley and over a pass is where we've started the project. And these dots that you're seeing we mapped different types of ranches and farms. And so you can generally see the distance to the first westernmost private lands is about 50 kilometers. And then this brown area, just for your information, is areas where ranchers have summertime leases to graze their cattle. So we have some nice buffers, 20 kilometers to any cattle grazing and 50 kilometers to private land. And this is what the heart of the reintroduction zone looks like. So it really is quite different from the Bow Valley. It has a lot more grassland, and that's a combination of being much more affected by the Chinook systems. And so it's a lot more like, say, Kananaskis country than deeper in Banff National Park. And then we've also, through our prescribed fire program, we've tried to replicate the much more frequent fire history that played out there long before we ever endeavored to do this project. So I just want to talk about our 5-year project in 3 phases. The first being the translocation, so the physical movement of the animals, which we brought from Elk Island. We started small. We started with 16, and it was really important, particularly to our agricultural stakeholders, that those animals were free of any diseases of concern. Brucellosis and tuberculosis primarily. And this herd in Elk Island, which these guys came from, fulfills that criteria. They've been tested by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency every second year since the 1970s, have consistently come up clean, but regardless, we did a lot of extra testing before we loaded these particular 16 animals and then brought them to Banff. So I think you kind of heard about this. This was a while ago now. This is February 2017, but this was the actual translocation project. And this final piece of it, because it's the remote backcountry of airlifting the bison themselves, really drove the logistics from right from the step one. But despite all those logistics and all the potential for something to go wrong, they all came off those containers with nothing more than minor abrasions, which were healed within a matter of weeks. So yeah, that part of the project went really well, and that kicked off what we called the soft release pasture phase. So rather than just open those crates and let them go in the wild and sort of hope for the best, we actually held them for 1.5 years. And that was really, our intent was to anchor them to that landscape, get them used to it, and have them calve a couple times so they are tied to it a little bit more before we actually release them. So we did all that. They calved twice there, and by the time we released them, all 10 cows had 10 calves 2 years in a row. So actually when we released them, there was more bison that had been born in Banff National Park than we brought from Elk Island. While we were holding them there, we were getting some things ready as well. We were doing further prescribed burns to increase the attractiveness of the habitat for them, particularly the grasslands and the area surrounding the soft release pasture. And then we were also setting up some drift fences in some of the key potential exit points from the reintroduction zone. And this is, I guess, my challenge in managing this project. One of two things, I guess. One has been trying to ensure that we've done everything possible to tie them to that landscape. And then the second has been to realize that what we're doing is kind of unnatural in the way that we're prescribing this initial reintroduction zone rather than just letting the animals go exactly where they want. So we built these drift fences which were meant to allow all the natural mammals that already exist in the wild to go through, under, or over unimpeded, but actually to deflect bison if they came to these potential exit points. And as odd a riddle that sounds, we've actually succeeded to date, with very few exceptions. And I think it's partly because these bison came from Elk Island, which is surrounded by a page wire fence like our highway fences around here, but they have an inherent respect for wire. And so they actually haven't been pushing these fences, which are much smaller in comparison.
Do you mind if we interrupt with questions or save them till the end?
It's up to you.
Yeah. So I'm just understanding the fencing. So as you said, and the photo shows, the fencing wouldn't stop a bison that wanted to go through. It just, they're not pushing it.
Yeah, it's really a bluff, I guess, and the bluff is mostly working so far, with a few exceptions that I'll talk about here near the end. And then we also radio collared the majority of those 16 animals, 14 of them, before we released them. And again, we had committed to stakeholders, including you, that we would have a high degree of monitoring here once we released them for the initial few years. So then came the happy day. It was end of July 2018, where we actually snipped that fence and pulled it back, and they were given their freedom back on this landscape for first time in many, many years, which is pretty neat. So I just want to talk the rest of the time here about what's been happening since, what we've been learning from them now that they have had their freedom. So this is that dark green blob. This is the reintroduction zone, but this is kind of how I see it with my small team of 4 staff. And we've basically broken it down to a core reintroduction zone in green. So that's kind of the happy place where we'd like to have the bison spend the majority of their time. The yellow star in the middle is where we had the soft release pasture positioned. And then this kind of surrounding area in yellow is what we call the hazing zone. So anytime bison are headed toward that hazing zone, we actually go out and try to physically herd them gently back in and to encourage them to tie into this target reintroduction zone. And then these little red and yellow slashes are where we have our system of drift fences around the peripheral zone. And then just outside of the park, an area called the Yahatinda Ranch area on provincial lands. The province has afforded us this zone that allows us a little bit of extra time to get the bison back in the park if they were to leave. And this is really important, I guess, within the context that bison, unlike inside the national park, outside in the province of Alberta, they're not considered wildlife. So if any bison stepped outside the park, technically speaking, somebody without a hunting license, without any permits, so long as they're conforming to firearm regulations at any time of the year, could shoot them. So this is where each dot here represents a location for a radio-collared bison. This is showing the 1.5 years since we released them, where they've moved. So a couple of patterns to note is all of their movements and explorations of the reintroduction zone have generally been in a northeasterly direction. So they haven't moved any closer to Canmore than the soft release pasture, for instance, since the day we released them. If you zoomed out on this map and drew a direct line to Elk Island, it would be in this northeasterly direction.
Really?
That said, bison also came from Elk Island that were reintroduced by Parks Canada to Grasslands National Park in southern Saskatchewan. And Elk Island is in a northwesterly direction from there, but they went in a northeasterly direction as well. And the northeast segment of that park, 14 years later, continues to be the favorite area for the bison. So yeah, I don't know if you have any theories on that, whether it's the Coriolis effect or something else, let me know. Anyway, that's one trend. A couple other things you'll notice, 2 of our drift fences in the Panther River Valley and in the Red Deer Valley have actually been pretty crucial to the success of the project of keeping the bison in the reintroduction so far. We're starting to see less visits to those fences, which infers they're exploring the zone and maybe starting to accept it a little bit more. And then another trend where we don't have some fences, but they did go to areas outside of the reintroduction zone, our efforts to haze and herd them have really paid off. And it'll often buy us weeks, if not months. They move quite well to the pressure that we are able to exert. And we usually fly in, and then it's a combination of some pressure from the air with helicopter, but mostly then on the ground is what seems to work best. This is the one graph I'm going to show you, and really just like you to look at the green line. And what this is showing is that the y-axis is the distance from the soft release pasture. So anytime the green line touches this bottom, it means they came back to the soft release pasture. And then this is just the months since we released them. So you can see the green is the main herd. So it's the vast majority of individuals. It's the cows, it's the young. And initially in the first few months, they returned to the soft release pasture quite frequently. And then through these months, they explored the next valley to the north, the red deer, and then just over last winter, they've actually started coming back to the soft release pasture area a little bit. So this is a really nice trend for somebody like me to be seeing. It suggests that maybe some of our approaches and strategies have been paying off. And then these spikes you're seeing here are a few lone bulls, and I'm sure you heard in the media in the initial weeks after we released them, and also one more this past summer, of some of these lone bulls deciding they wanted to be somewhere else. And so this is a map of their movements. The first one we lost was this guy in green. We managed to recapture him well outside of the park. And then he now lives with the Piikani First Nation down in southern Alberta in one of their cultural herds. Unfortunately, we had to put down the guy in purple here because it was during those August forest fires when we couldn't get a helicopter of the size we needed to airlift them a couple Augusts ago. And this dotted line is because this guy was uncollared. This was last August, and we had one sighting of him just outside the park here, and then the next sightings came in 11 kilometers east of Sundre, and he was obviously on the move as well. We actually caught up to him right along the township road and managed to get a dart in him and put him in the horse trailer, and he now lives in the Rocky Mountain House historic site display herd. I was just there last week talking to the Rocky Mountain House Council, and I actually went out and saw him. He seems pretty happy.
Was he happy to see you?
Not necessarily, yeah. And then the only other one is this pink line, and it's actually of a bison cow and her two young, and they also left the park, but within a day they came back of their own volition with no actions by us, which was pretty neat to see as well. That was a couple Octobers ago, and fortunately she's been with, and her young have been with the main herd ever since. So just some slides of where they have, some of these dots actually look like on the landscape. This is directly north of the soft release pasture, and this ridge, this is actually two of the cows who had their calves 2 days before we released them, and they basically became mountain goats overnight, climbed to the highest ridge, and they spent the next month on these green slopes right almost at the summit of this mountain.
I have to ask you, Karsten, what was the degree of slope that they managed?
Yeah, we were kind of thinking in the soft release pasture, well, let's make sure there's some steep slopes because these guys come from Elk Island and they won't know how to go up hills or down. And those guys were on slopes probably 55 degrees right out of the gate. Yeah, and right here, spending time in the sort of start zones of avalanches. And again, in the months of August, this kind of makes sense. This is a lot what elk do. They're actually following the freshest growth. Like, we all love baby spinach more than we do the stuff that bolts in August in our gardens. It's the same thing for these guys. They're following that early growth as the snow recedes, and it's the most nutritious and most efficient for them to be eating as well. But this is the kind of habitat, this is in the Red Deer Valley, this is kind of where we typically would have expected to see them and where we do see them in the fall and the winters. And actually, this is an area where they were just yesterday in the Red Deer Valley, and they moved a little bit west this morning. This is us on the ground, again, after being flown in and actually physically moving them down. It's called the Tyrrell Creek Drainage, and just kind of working at a distance. And this is probably maybe how you deal with some of your spouses or staff or We're trying to work in that zone between what we call the pressure zone when they note our presence, and then the zone of fleeing where they would actually run, and we're just trying to work in that magic area in between, not inciting too much excitement. They're all doing really well. They're very healthy. We haven't fed them anything since we released them, so they're obviously finding the forage and the minerals that they need. And so far we've only had one death, and it was a calf that was born last spring, and at about 3 months of age we just stopped seeing it with its mother, and neither its mother nor the calf were radio collared, so we don't know exactly what happened other than it died of natural causes. And again, you know, I was talking to the media quite a bit once we came out with this, and I really think this is actually, although it's sad for the individual, it's really a milestone of success for the project, because to my point at the beginning, when you're trying to restore the ecological integrity of this landscape, it includes bison returning as a potential food source for predators and scavengers as well. So this is the number of bisons that's gone up since we started in the herd, and you're just seeing those 2 bumps of calving seasons in captivity, and then just a slight bump. They only had 3 calves this past year, and then we lost one. And I think the reason they only had 3 calves, a couple things, is I think our 100% calving rates are just that we had in captivity. Essentially, we can't expect that those would continue once they're wild. But also we released them during the breeding season, and it was pretty chaotic for them, and I wouldn't be surprised if they just hadn't sort of had the peace of mind and normal mindset to be hooking up at that time when they all of a sudden their world has completely changed. But I think it's also important to kind of project out of what we could be dealing with over time, and this is really what I'm starting to think about as we move forward. I'm not completely convinced that the bison were home free in terms of them tying into the landscape, but with each passing day that's looking better and better. But I did a little tour of some of the states last spring where they have done reintroductions there, and kind of trying to understand what we're going to be looking at in the next few decades. And where bison have stuck around, they generally grow, the herd growth is about 20% per year. So as you project out, that's pretty incredible growth, and at some point you probably have to introduce some sort of harvest as well. And then we had some stakeholder concerns around how the bison might influence other wildlife species, particularly species of value to trophy hunting. And so we actually that's clearly the phase we're in now. I don't have anything to report, but we're clearly in the research phase and learning phase right now as we head towards our 2022 assessment of the pilot project. A lot of people are interested in how are the bison responding to people. This is a picture I took from horseback last April. Generally speaking, when you're on horseback, or a member of the public is, they don't seem to mind too much, and you kind of move around them a few hundred meters away. But we are noticing when people are on foot, they have much more of a fleeing response. And we're hoping that, because they've been fleeing up to 5 kilometers sometimes at a run when they're surprised. And I'm hopeful that that'll wane with time, but that they'll still have that inherent respect as well. But certainly no incidents or behavior in the realm of aggressiveness. And just finishing here, one of the coolest things for me working on the project is now that the bison are back, they're actually showing us things that I wasn't even aware of before. This is where I spent the first 10 years of my career in the backcountry of Banff National Park as a park warden. And as the bison are grazing back these grasses that haven't been grazed to this extent for many, many decades, they're actually revealing things like wallows of their ancestors. And then in some cases reactivating them, and then in some cases actually through their hoof action along trails and their horning activity on the edge of these wallows is actually unearthing bison bones and fragments of skulls from their ancestors as well. So it's really a neat story of it all coming full circle. Yeah. So again, reversible 5-year project in 2022, we'll hit the big pause button, evaluate based on everything we've learned you know, some of which I've shared with you today, some of which we're still learning over the next 2.5 years. And then ask ourselves the question, is longer term restoration in this landscape feasible? And if the answer is yes, then we'll proceed with a bison management plan and also probably project some of the numbers, ideal numbers we'd like to see out there. And if it's no, we've committed to removing the animals and the fences. This is just a bit of video from one of our remote cameras, and I just wanted to end with it because this really is what's transpiring on a daily basis out there. Is they're out there, they're encountering very few people, and they're just doing their thing, and they look perfectly natural return to this landscape, and it's pretty neat, and it's pretty rewarding. Thanks very much.
Thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. You know, we hear bits and pieces through your interviews with the press and all, but this is really great to see. And I remember when you first came to council years ago to start presenting the possibility and working with the communities. So I mean, it looks to me like this is a big success. I expect you consider it a big success.
So far, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
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 Just curious, earlier in your presentation you referenced something about some hesitation around the bison being down here in the busy Bow Valley. Is that actually a possibility in reality that they could end up in Bow Valley through natural migrations? Or?
Absolutely, yeah, no, I think that could be a potential future possibility. And to go to places like Yellowstone, where it's all normalized and you're having them even drift into peripheral towns and so on, you know, that I think that it is a possibility. And, you know, so I think, like I certainly think personally about, I think it'd be a long time, and that the intent was to allow us as humans to kind of get used to having these guys back around. But you know, coexisting with bison is no different really than coexisting with everything that we do already coexist with and do our best at doing that today, whether it's grizzly bears or elk. And you know, so I think, you know, things like wildlife corridors, for instance, which I know are, you know, really important consideration for town council and have been for many councils in the past. I'm thinking of these things as potential bison corridors, maybe not in our lifetimes, but it'd be pretty neat if bison could be using them as well.
Trying to visualize, you know, looking out my back deck and seeing bison grazing in that little park instead of elk.
There's quite a few places in North America where that's happening, and it's not a big deal.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for that presentation. That's really interesting. I can't believe it's 2.5 years already.
Yeah, it goes
because
fast.
I know we talked about it as it was leading up, and then it's been activated. So one of the things about the remote location was that we needed to engage the community and the people around the world to be informed about what was happening there.
Yeah.
Did you have a video feed that was going out to the world regularly?
Yeah, what we've done, we've really been working on that, is to kind of bring the story to people, recognizing it's a pretty remote place. And so we've made a bunch of different video series. I mean, it's we've been parts of stories that have run in every kind of media across the world. And I think our collective estimate of the sort of reach we've had so far with this story, which has generally been an inspiring, positive story, has been over 130 million people globally. Yeah.
And is that all available on that particular site?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have a live feed, you're just uploading video to that
Yeah,
site?
we upload and we actually produce some videos, you know, with the sort of inherent messaging in it, and we do a blog posting about once a month, and then quite a few social media on our social media platforms through Parks Canada.
Great.
And then traditional media as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Seeley, you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Public perception, ranchers and everything else, when you started the project, there was some fears of, is that quieted down quite a bit, or is it still a concern of some ranchers?
I think, you know, like a lot of these things, the largest concerns exist with those partners and stakeholders who are likely to be most directly affected. So you're right, there was some concern from ranchers operating and grazing their cattle on some of the public lands towards the park. We made some commitments that helped assuage some of those concerns before we started. One of them being if a bison does come out onto those grazing leasehold lands, that we would deal with it. We would recapture or put it down. And we got pretty roasted on social media when we did put that one bull down, for instance. But we gained a heck of a lot of credibility because we maintained our commitments to those particular stakeholders. And as you know, you have to do that. If you make commitments, you have to uphold them. And, you know, this is, I recognize it's a new thing for many people in their lifetimes. It's an old thing if you think about the ecological history of this landscape. But, you know, just as we're seeing with the COVID-19 virus right now, it's hard to wrap your head around some new things and just how much they can change. So that's where we committed to starting small and going slow and upholding those commitments we made.
Great. Well, thank you. This is really exciting.
Great. Thanks.
I wonder if you could just, you spoke really briefly at the end about the longer term restoration, and not sure what you're thinking there, what the intent of that is.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like we are constantly in conversation with the province, for instance, and you know, it'd be a lot easier if you could employ some tools like public hunting pressure outside of the park to maintain certain population targets, for instance. So we're just in discussions about exploring some of those options longer term, things that would make a lot of sense from a financial perspective, but also from a harvest perspective for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So it's pretty wide open right now, but you know, if you think about the long-term sustainability, I think it's tied up in some of those questions as well.
So once the herd becomes sufficiently large, then some sort of culling would be healthy, is what I'm hearing?
Probably, yeah. And if you think about the history of bison in North America, that always existed to some extent. Mm-hmm. And Parks Canada has always been open right from the get-go, right from conceptualization of this project, that would likely become part of it if it went well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much for being here today. That
Great.
was very interesting.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And we'll look forward to watching as the herd grows. Now we have a delegation from Alpine Helicopters. And Mr. Cooper is presenting.
Mr. Gubbles.
Pardon me?
Mr. Gubbles.
Okay.
Thank you for your help.
Give your mouse a little wipe there.
Much appreciated. Thank you. I think before I start into the presentation, one thing that I'd like to ask is that because I think a lot of the questions that you might have as I go through it are very likely going to be answered in the presentation as we go along. We made a few changes to the original deck that we actually sent you, and we added a little bit more meat to it, so to speak. So if we can hold the questions to the end, that'd be much appreciated.
You bet.
Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. I'm Dave Gubbles, President of Alpine Helicopters. Today I have my colleague Chris Norman, who's our Director of Operations at Alpine, and Todd Cooper, who I'm sure most of the folks in the valley know who he is. He's our Canmore Base Manager. 2 weeks ago, the world was a very different place. Things we took for granted now feel fragile. The tourism industry and the global visitors to the Bow Valley are critical to local businesses, local jobs, and local economics. That said, we're grateful for the work done by the Heliport Monitoring Committee and members of the town administration. Today, we'd like to tell you about Alpine. our dedication to safety in Canmore, the heliport infrastructure, and our corner of the tourism industry. We have been a steadfast employer in Canmore for decades. In that time, we have employed hundreds of local staff. Annually, we pay $3 million in salaries to Canmore-based personnel. In 2019, Alpine spent $350,000 with local suppliers and businesses. These two things are intertwined. Hiring locally continues the business cycle. These people shop, fill their tanks, dine out, and participate in the community. Alpine has been a quiet community supporter for all the years we've operated. We've flown under the radar when it comes to talking about investment that we've made in the community. Make no mistake, though, we've been investing. We are proud of the investment of over $100,000 we've made to local organizations. We are committed to this community. Putting a priority on being a good corporate citizen is important to Alpine. We have been a cooperative tenant and diligent, valuable taxpayer, with a contribution of $138,000 in taxes and lease payments in 2019. Alpine Helicopters has operated for decades in Canmore. Our beginnings were as Canmore Helicopters, founded by the late Lance Cooper. In 1994, Canmore Helicopters became Alpine Helicopters. We have built a diverse and successful operation in Canmore. Because of that commitment and success, we've been able to give back to Canmore. Alpine is a world-class integrated business. We support the Canmore community through services that ensure quality of life for the residents, environment, and ecosystem of this town and beyond. That support also extends to the industries that keep this town thriving. Our key services are wildfire suppression and management, search and rescue, emergency transport, tourism, and commercial services. Alpine is a steadfast advocate for the Canmore community and a key player in the tourism industry that keeps our town thriving. The only thing larger than our commitment to this community is our commitment to safety. We protect our most valuable resource, our people. Our operations are subject to stringent regulatory processes from all levels of government. This includes audits from both industry and provincial and federal governments. Our adherence to those rules goes above and beyond. So how do we do that? Through search and rescue, emergency transport, fire suppression and prevention, avalanche control, and flood response. Our team is the search and rescue as well as the emergency transport agency for Canmore and the Bow Valley. Our proximity also allows us an opportunity to address the critical timeliness some situations present. We also play a critical role in proactively mitigating harm in Canmore. Our work on fire suppression and management, as well as avalanche control, creates a safe outdoor environment for residents of our town. Our flood response played a critical role in 2013. During the 2013 flood, we responded with all available resources. With no heliport to work from, our team worked from the back of our trucks. Alpine's rescue pilots performed long-line rescues from roofs of homes and vehicles, and we put critical supplies into the hands of those rebuilding our community. Our services bring peace of mind to the community and those who enjoy it, both from a safety perspective and commercial work. In 2019, Alpine responded to 274 calls in the Bow Valley, Banff, Kananaskis, and Golden. Of those 274 calls, 140 of them required the use of the long-line rescue system, critical to timely rescue in remote areas. We are outdoors people. Our investment in safety of our environment and ecosystem comes on a personal and professional level. Maintaining that is important to every Alpine staff member. We take tremendous pride in our work with wildlife studies, species work, including grizzlies, bison, and wolverine, as well as the work we do to support the water and forest resources of the Bow Valley. We've been involved in that Bison project since they actually started it. As a critical service and world-class operations, we have great pride of place. We have ensured the highest level of care and attention when it comes to taking care of our space. We assess our infrastructure, including our fleet, regularly. We are compliant with the Town of Canmore fire regulations and maintain routine fire checks. Our fuel handling and emissions controls are under strict compliance, and it is our aim to meet and surpass those controls. Alpine works with other operations to ensure everyone is diligently educated on flight path adherence in and out of the heliport. The tourism side of our business allows Alpine to give those who visit Canmore and our Rocky Mountains an unmatched perspective of the beauty of our backyard. We hear from our guests that our tours are a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Our tourism business allows us to cycle dollars back into safety technology. We are proud of the quality space we occupy in the tourism sector in the valley. At the current moment, we offer 4 tours from the Canmore base. Alpine traffic over Canmore is declining. In 2021, the 12-minute flight will be discontinued entirely. 2020, which is this year, will be a transition year, limiting the 12-minute flights to weekdays between the hours of 8:30 and 5, and without even beginning to speak about what the current global landscape will mean for tourism and jobs in the valley, Alpine is taking steps to ensure alignment with the current climate. We recently had our annual open house. We do it every year, and we were happy to host a couple of members from council and over 300 Canmore community members. We received overwhelmingly positive feedback from those who joined us, and we cleared up some misunderstandings about Alpine and what we do in the community. As I mentioned, changes to our tourism flights are coming. The 12-minute flight will not run on weekends or stat holidays in 2020, this year, and the 12-minute flight will be eliminated in 2021. A 10-year lease renewal on the heliport would include the opportunity for many improvements such as solar panels, further relationship building with environmental groups in Canmore, and evaluating a program for all guests to purchase carbon offsets. Yesterday, we received a video from a local family. They are a family many of you may know. We'd like to share it with you now. It's just a short clip.
In 2001, I returned from New Zealand, having learned how to do some basic rock climbing.
That's unfortunate. We'd love you to be able to hear what they're saying.
Anybody here lip read?
Community board that I was looking for climbing partners.
It's on all the way. That's all I know.
Our technology is failing us today.
In 2001, I returned from New Zealand, having learned how to do some basic rock climbing. Posted an advertisement on the Alpine Club of Canada
Is there something else I need to turn on here?
community board that I was looking for climbing partners. And where my parents lived in Canmore, it was a great place to go back and
Okay, well,
Yeah, let's just go.
If we're unable to hear it,
yeah,
you could share it,
we can share it afterwards.
right? So we could,
If we're, yeah, that might be the best.
then-
Interestingly, the video is playing online. So if we play it, the recording is recording it. So it's just
okay, well, let's have it online so those at home can
in
witness it.
2001, I returned from
It's
New
only about
Zealand,
3 minutes.
having learned how to do some basic rock
Turn your
climbing.
phone up, Lisa.
Posted an advertisement on the Alpine Club of Canada community board that I was looking for climbing partners. And where my parents lived in Canmore, it was a great place to go back and get more into alpine climbing, even though I didn't really know what that meant.
Turn it up.
I found a girl to go climbing with. We agreed to meet up in the morning at about 6 o'clock in the morning and go climb reprobate on the east end of Rundle, because it seemed like a relatively easy climb. Wandered around the base for an hour or two. I think we found the place to start climbing and started climbing, and it's quite quickly clear that we for on a different route altogether, something that didn't match up with the little topo we had. The day wore on, we wandered our way up the face little by little, trying to make it to the top. We didn't think we had enough equipment and know how to rappel down through this sort of strange terrain that we found ourselves in.
We were starting to get concerned and worried as Jeff had not yet returned from climbing. After much pacing and worrying, Jeff called to explain he was still on the mountain and needed a rescue. He had spoken with George Field, Key Country's public safety specialist, and George said Jeff and his climbing partner would need to spend the night on the mountain and rescue would be initiated in the morning. I wanted to keep Jeff on the line throughout the night, however, maintaining cell phone batteries for morning contact with George dictated we say goodbye and go into waiting mode. Knowing Jeff was perched on a tiny ledge all night, cold, and having run out of water and food was the longest night for me. When I heard and watched the Alpine helicopter fly over to Heuer in the morning, it was like music to my ears. I still feared for our son, but knew that experienced help was on its way.
And we were rescued in the morning. Helicopter with 6 passengers flew to the top of the east end of Rundle. They pounded in stakes.
Well, sorry about that. It's unfortunate that you couldn't hear it, but it was about a rescue that happened many years ago and about the outcome and how successful the story was. And it was, the messaging is just to let it show everybody and have them realize just how important the rescue services that Alpine provides to the community and how important it is. So we're in full support of the decision that you made to close the gallery to the public. We totally understand the what's going on out there with the issues that we have with the health of in our environment now, and as a result we had a few friends that are unable to be here with us. We did print a letter from our past deputy fire chief and a letter from Mark Ledwidge that we don't know whether or not you've seen that. We have copies of that, so I'd just like to share those with you so that you can have a read of those, supporting Alpine in the community. Each letter reiterates the way in which Alpine business comes together to support the family community. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present today, especially amongst the friends who presented before us. We appreciate your time, and we do invite questions, but we'd like to take them in camera. We have a lot of sensitivities about our business that we're willing to share with you, but we don't necessarily want them part of the public docket.
I think there's likely some questions specific to your presentation that we can ask at this time, and if any of the questions from any councillors are looking for information that's protected in some way, then after the public session we could certainly go in camera and further explore that. Of course, as much as possible, we want to have the conversation in the public. But just to your presentation, I missed, you said something about carbon offsets, and I just missed what you said. Could you repeat that?
Well, there's a lot of initiatives out there, and one that we're looking at possibly doing is that we have people that come from all over the place, and one thing that you can do is you can ask people, or you can build it into the pricing on your tour, but you can suggest to people that they pay for a carbon offset for the amount of fuel that you're burning. I mean, sometimes that's done in the airlines, it's done in the skiing business, that kind of thing. So we're thinking about how, we haven't firmed up the plan for that, but we're thinking about what that model would look like, but it's definitely on our radar.
It's great that you're talking about it. So as I understand right now, you're thinking of making that a request to your clients, or Alpine would simply make the carbon offsets and add that cost to your fares?
Well, that's correct, Mayor, and I think that how that'll play out will just depend on the response that we get and whether we have to make changes in it. We're since we looked at that and wrote that, we're going into some pretty tough economic times in the tourism business, and we really don't know how long it's going to take to actually get people back here and what they're willing to pay for and all of that. We don't know. There's a period of uncertainty that we're going into, so that's the best I can answer that question right now. I don't really know what that'll look like.
Okay, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion around that aspect of the conversation. I know within the community there's been a number of questions raised about GHG emissions, and of course the town has made a point of stating that this is a primary interest to us, the climate action. You also were talking about the 12-minute flight, and I know that you moved a number of the 12-minute flights to Stoney this last summer, is that right?
That is correct. There's a challenge with doing that. It's not all easy for me to say, well, we just move them all out there, because it doesn't mean that you can replace that 12-minute flight in Canmore with doing it out at Stoney, because not necessarily everybody's going to embrace that and go. It's up to your tourism customer whether they want to take that extra 20-minute drive to go out there and 20 minutes back, and whether they actually have time to do that depending on their other agenda and what they're doing. So some of them have moved out there. We do our marketing program in tourism is done well over a year in advance to the tour company. So that's the struggle with this year that we're going into, that there are some that were sold a year ago, if the people come, depending on what's happening out there right now. Mm-hmm. But if they do come, they've actually potentially purchased those products for this year. And that's why we've tried to consolidate those, not fly them on weekends, and fly them between 8 and 5, or 9 and 5, whatever I said there, as a normal course of business. Right. But the following year, they're gone.
So this past summer, you were following that practice, so there were no 12-minute tours on the weekends, is that correct?
You'll have to help me with that, Todd. This past summer, was there?
There was on occasion, and once again, that's because of that year in advance sales. So when possible, we definitely did not run the 12-minute tour. And while like David mentioned, it's because everything's sold a year in advance. So we've already gone to the tour operators for 2021, and they know that product is no longer available as of January 1st, 2021.
Okay, so for this summer, that will be the practice. The 12-minute tour would only be weekdays.
Correct, yes. So as of when this tour season hopefully starts up again, that practice will be implemented
right.
as well. Yeah.
And then for 2021, I'm hearing a commitment to eliminate entirely.
Correct.
And that's really valuable or helpful information. Just related to that specific aspect of your operation, and this may not be something you can answer in public, I'm not sure, but I'm curious in general terms where the majority of the tourists or the passengers on those shorter flights might originate from. Do you have any idea, or you must track the data where those tourists come from? I don't mean in terms of country, home country, but are they visitors that are staying in Canmore, visitors that are staying in Banff or Kananaskis, or?
That's a really difficult question for us to answer, because we know who the tour company is. The guests come from all over the world, so we don't have a sense of where they're staying, whether they're staying in a hotel in Canmore or a hotel in Banff, or whether they're transitioning through to Calgary. We don't actually track. I believe we track where their hometown is, because we know we have to do that for our flight itinerary, so that we record their name and where they're from, but we don't know where they're staying locally in town. We don't keep track of that.
I think I might be able to help you with part of that question.
Might just sort of step in a bit.
Yeah,
Thanks.
sorry. So to clarify, the 12-minute tour is our most popular tour, and generally because of the price point. So a lot of the folks that take that 12-minute tour are families and more of a local, Calgary, Canmore, that type of area. So because of the price point, that 12-minute tour is quite popular for families and things like that. So I would say the demographic of that 12-minute tour is more of a local demographic than it is an international product like some of our other tours. So hopefully that helps.
It helps, thank you. Councillor Seeley.
Just on the same subject, the open house that you had, I assume that 12-minute tour has been adjusted because of the information that you received. Anything else that jumps out, I guess, from a noise perspective, and some of the residents, what they're wanting you to do? Is there any other adjustments that you're making?
I think most of the comments, and I can ask Todd to help me with that, but most of the comments that we had from the community were that they like the fact that they had a heliport in this community because so many of them are outdoor people, and they actually like the fact that knowing that if they're out on a hike or they lose somebody on a trail or whatever, they know that they've got that support from the rescue authorities to have that aircraft to go out. That was one of the positive things that came out of that open house. One of the other interesting things was the amount of children that were there. It was fantastic to see people bringing their families out and their pets out and coming out to have a look, and just a general interest in helicopters and the activity we do and the type of work that we do. There's some new technology in rescue work these days, and we put on a display in the hangar about the RECO system, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And it was very well received.
Yeah, so I think most of you have probably seen some of the media that we've had regarding the RECO tool. So it's a search tool, and it has a quite broad range of uses for it. It's very simple. It's just a reflector, so it takes the radio signal that comes from the device, reflects it back, and then just by basically covering ground and making that signal, weakening the signal as you get closer, narrows the search area, and actually is it's a very valuable tool, and we're lucky enough to be the fourth operator in North America to have that unit. So that's another thing that, because of our relationships with the search and rescue business, that we bring to the Bow Valley as well. So,
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor? Yeah.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for your presentation. I had a question for you regarding the information you presented on your slide about the $3 million that are paid in salaries. How much staff is that? How much staff do you actually have?
Upwards of 50 in the summer season, and some of those are casual folks that are here just for the summertime. They could be people that work on the front desk in the log building or help out in there, help handling our guests, doing the briefings, manage them as they go out onto the heliport deck. In the wintertime, we might be down around 32 full-time staff members, and a lot of those are, the reason the salary number seems so high is because those are good paid jobs. I mean, people that have the technical ability to fly a helicopter in the mountains and go out and do a long-line rescue, they're not a dime a dozen, so to speak, anywhere, and their salary levels are good, and we're proud to have them because their technical ability and the fact that they like to live here in Canmore is fantastic. So that, I don't know if that...
Yeah, so the salary that you're quoting here is for both rescue and for tourism?
That is for all employees
For all
that
employees.
are involved here in Canmore.
Okay. And when it sounds like you're planning to eliminate the 12-minute flight, are you going to be offering a different product to replace that 12-minute flight?
We've looked at that, and I don't know that yet. And the reason for that is that we're just in the planning stages because we are just we're in the process of eliminating that short flight, that 12-minute flight, and we don't know what kind of response we're going to get from our customers as yet. So we don't know if we're going to have to introduce something that's a little bit longer that is a better price point than, say, the half-hour tour that somebody wants to go out. We're quite sensitive to the fact that if all you offer is a half-hour tour and it's at a fairly expensive rate, that a tourism guest isn't going to come in here with 2 or 3 of their family members and go and fly on that tour. They're looking for something that's a little bit more economical, but they still want to go on that flight. So I don't have an answer for that question right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm really curious about your experience with the operations out at Stony Nakoda, because I recall speaking with one of the representatives from Alpine a couple of years ago about this, and you were just getting the Stony Nakoda thing up and running. So just in brief, could you help me understand how it operates out there and what the operating model is and how that connects with what's happening here in Canmore?
Mr. Mayor, I think out of respect for our agreement with the Stony Nakoda First Nations that are out there, I really don't care to comment exactly on how that works out there in the whole bit. It's quite a bit different than the Canmore heliport, and it's an arrangement that we have as at Alpine with the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and
I appreciate, and I wasn't meaning to probe into contractual issues. I was, so their staff, for instance, your staff based in Canmore and fly out of Stoney Nakoda, or
some staff do, but typically there's 3 to 4 aircraft that are based out at Stoney Nakoda, and a lot of those staff come from Calgary.
I see.
Particularly the maintenance staff, and so they wouldn't be included in those numbers that were with Canmore, because we've maintained that fleet of aircraft with engineers and occasionally pilots that have come from Calgary. So it's kind of a mix, because we have a base in Calgary that we've had for a long time as well, and we have quite a, we've probably got 12 employees that are based in Calgary as well, and they kind of come out to get from Canmore and Calgary to support that Stoney Nakoda operation.
Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, so the ground crew and pilots in Stoney Nakoda all come from Canmore. They rotate through both bases.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Todd.
And generally, well, not generally, we always get an annual report that gives a bit of a breakdown on the flights, the number of flights and the type of flights, and I assume that's coming, I can't remember when it comes.
I think that's coming on the 25th of the month, March 25th, at the annual heliport committee meeting.
All right.
That's
okay.
when that report is typically filed.
Yeah, and if I was interested in seeing an analysis of the changes to the number of specific flights over the years since this lease was signed, is that data that's open-based data, or is that something that's...
I think that we have a lot of detailed data on that, and we would be prepared to provide that to yourself, Mr. Mayor, and the councillors, but what we would ask is that we'd like you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and we'd provide you with that information. The reason for that is that the helicopter business is a very competitive environment, and there's always other operators that are looking for that kind of information to try and figure out whether or not they would be interested in entertaining that type of operation.
I appreciate that. And perhaps we could arrange for that at some point, not today. And in this context, I see letters to the paper, and I'm approached by folks in the community that are, concerned by the noise, and that's always something that I hear from members of the community. Or the number of flights have escalated certain number of times since, since some history, some date in history, and I can't speak to that. So it'd be nice to be able to speak to that directly. I understand that some of your information is protected.
Yeah,
so if I were to look at it and sign the disclosure, I couldn't reveal, but it's information that would at least help me in the discussions that are coming forward. So perhaps we can arrange for that at some point.
Sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, that information is in the annual report.
The historical data as well?
Correct.
Okay, I was thinking it was actually. Right, so it's a different level of detail that you're talking about that you keep protected.
Well, a different level of detail that might refer to things like passenger numbers and
sure.
that kind of stuff, yeah.
Okay.
But the number of flights, it's in that report.
Yeah, going back to, well, a certain time in history, I recall seeing that in the reports. So we'll see that in April. That's what I heard. Your next report was in April this year?
Yeah, so that annual report is finished. I have a copy of it, but once again, we'd like to protect that information. So, yeah, but all that information is in the annual report.
Okay. Thank you both very much. Are there other questions, members of council? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Gubbels.
Thank you.
You were speaking to the number of seasonal staff that you hire, and you speak of your full-time staff and how well they're paid and they're good paying jobs. Could you let us know, are your seasonal staff paid a living wage here in Canmore?
I think we do.
Okay.
I think that we're very competitive with the hourly rate schedule that we have for our staff, and obviously they are hourly paid employees.
Yeah.
We're just actually, a bit of information for you, we're working on a program right now to keep most of them employed while the heliport is actually closed. We're very cognizant of the fact that if we don't keep these folks employed, we won't have them when we try to start up again.
Yeah, of course, yeah, I think a lot of businesses are looking at that. And does Alpine provide staff accommodation at all for their seasonal staff?
No, we don't.
Okay.
No.
And so in terms of airspace, we have gotten concerns, both in favor and against, I guess, about helicopter noise, etc. But who actually controls the airspace over, say, the town of Canmore or Stoney Nakoda?
Well, that's Transport Canada. I mean,
Right.
There's a minimum flight requirement to go over town at 1,000 feet, and that's uncontrolled airspace. At the heliport the heliport, of course, is owned by the town of Canmore. Alpine Helicopters manages that heliport, and we follow the Transport Canada and Nav Canada guidelines for that, and there is what's called a prior permission required. So in that case, if I was some other company, I wanted to bring a helicopter in, I would phone Todd and get permission to bring that helicopter into that heliport and land there. And the reason for that is because it can be quite busy, but it also gives an opportunity for us, as I mentioned in the briefing, that we can ask them not to fly over town, to make their approaches as per the mandated published heliport requirements. And if it's a medium helicopter, we can make a comment about that in terms of how we want to come in, because they're a noisier machine.
Right. And so if Alpine decided that they wanted to take their base outside of Canmore, there really wouldn't be anything stopping any aircraft company from really flying over Canmore airspace.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, as long as they're 1,000 feet up over a built-up area. That's a standard rule anywhere in Canada.
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that my understanding was correct.
You have a lot of transitioning aircraft that go through here on a regular basis that go down this valley.
Yeah.
It's a VFR corridor to get into British Columbia, and there's machines, whether they're firefighting helicopters or whether they're in the ski business or whatever, but they all transition through here.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh,
Just to
Mr. Cooper.
clarify one more thing, sorry. So what I've done is produced several Google Earth files, and so when we have visiting aircraft or transient aircrafts, I can give them that information, and then the arrival and departure paths are basically, well, they are what we're entitled, or what we're supposed to, what am I talking about here? The Google Earth files are exactly what we have to abide by in Schedule D. So that information I can pass on to other people and other operators. So when they come in here, they follow the same procedures we do as laid out in Schedule D.
So you're actually almost serving like air traffic control
No,
de facto in terms of making sure people know how to approach and take off?
well, we're just trying to be good neighbors.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm just trying to pass on as much information as I can to outside aircraft so they are following the same procedures that we are to follow the Schedule D.
Perfect. Thanks, Mr. Cooper.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. In our slide deck that we got, there's a tour called Marvel. And the one that you showed on the screen, it was a 45-minute tour. Is that correct?
I'll let Todd answer that.
It's a total of 45 minutes, so it's a half-hour flight with a 15-minute stopover.
Okay. And how does that relate to the flights in and out of Assiniboine? I thought that was an Assiniboine flight, but this is something different.
No, it's a separate, it follows the Mount Assiniboine sightseeing tour route, and then it
Okay.
stops in Marble Pass, and then it's a 15-minute stopover, and then it flies back on the same tour route. So it follows the exact same tour route with just a stopover for 15 minutes.
So how do you factor in the flights into Assiniboine?
How do we factor in what respect?
Do you provide that?
We do, yes.
Okay. So is that considered part of your tourism allocation?
No, because, so for Assiniboine, for that shuttle, the first flight flies out of Canmore to the lodge, and then all the remaining flights into the lodge fly from Mount Shark helipad. So there's only one movement from Canmore to initiate the Mount Assiniboine Lodge transfer.
Okay, so, but that's not factored into, is that factored in Schedule D as part of the tourism?
No,
Component?
that falls under our commercial work.
Okay, so the flights into Assiniboine are over and above what's factored into your tourism component?
They're separated. So once again, that information is all in the annual report, but it's separated into two different sections.
Okay.
One being commercial work and one being sightseeing.
Okay, thank you.
But just to reiterate, that Mount Assiniboine Lodge shuttle there's only one flight from Canmore to start that whole process.
On each schedule, so that you go in Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday?
Yeah.
So there's one flight?
Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Monday on a long weekend.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't know if there's other information you did want to share today in camera, or have we more or less covered the presentation that you wanted to give?
Well, you know, I only have one more comment, if I can take another minute of your time, and that
Yes.
is, and I've thought a lot about it, but there's very few communities that I'm aware of. There are some in North America that are as unique as Canmore. I mean, this is it's a fantastic environment to live. It's a beautiful place. All the time that I've spent here, I absolutely love it. And I think that what you've got here that is really unique about this town is that heliport. You know, the fact that you have the capability and a staffed heliport to do a rescue 365 days a year in daylight hours, and the fact that you can attract the number of people that want to come here and go on a flight. A lot of the people that we fly are people that can't go and hike up to the top of the mountains and have a look around, and that's why they absolutely love taking a helicopter tour, because they actually get to see what is out there, and for most of them it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I think having a heliport as part of your town is fantastic, and I think it's very unique, and I think it is something that's worth considering.
Thank you very much for that. And we will, of course, be having more conversations around this, you know, with the lease negotiation. I just wanted to be clear that there wasn't something else that you wanted to share with council today, but in camera. We asked a number of questions, and perhaps we covered.
I think a lot of the questions covered a lot of the additional information, which is great. And thank you very much again for allowing us the time to come here and talk to you about what we do at the heliport.
All right, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So at this point, I will move on to the minutes. Look into the minutes of February 18th. Any errors or omissions? See none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we will move to item D1 just for questions, since there's no presenter here. So looking at the report for D1, I had some questions that I'm trying to follow the bouncing ball on the plan changes, particularly to the I wanted to say flights, the buses between the hours of 10 and 3:30. So it seems clear that Rome plans to make those trips at an hour and a half, a little more than an hour and a half interval. Later on, under potential future, I think number 8, it talks about 35-minute service from 10 to 3, potential future. And it notes the costs. There would be a $30,000 operational cost in 2020, and there was something else, but in number 8 under potential future, I guess it's the same, it's referenced in both locations, the same thing, but I'm curious if that approximately $30,000 increased cost to run that degree of service, level of service would be incorporated into the paid parking revenues. I know you can't answer the question, but that's a question, maybe you can answer the question.
Yes, just to be clear, my understanding is that because it's a potential future project would require further approval and resources, so that in the heading of that table, potential future, those items require additional resources or approvals or both. So we can certainly get further information to council on that, but my understanding is that would come back to council at a later date for approvals.
You're right, but it also, the same direction is referenced in the chart earlier on under planned. Oh no, that's potential future. Maybe it's in there twice.
I think it's in the financial impact section as well as the potential future section. So
regardless, so that's something coming along in the future. And did you also have a point?
So the planned is what they can accommodate within the current budget, which is expanding that time to 70-minute service between 10 and 4:30. The potential future, they're saying with that additional 30,000 operational costs, they could compress that time. However, as Ms. DeSoto referenced, the budget is not there yet. So while we've confirmed that there is room in the Canmore operating reserve for that, it would need approval from the board and from council before we made a change like that.
I mean, if Mr. Bean was here, I would dig in a little bit about defect. I mean, that is a change, quite a change, I think, albeit in the slower hours. So a bus comes along once every hour and a half rather than every hour. And just curious, you know, about the conversations at Rome that led to that decision, but I'll wait.
just, sorry for clarity, was there a question that you wanted us to follow up with Mr. Bean on?
Well, the question was around if the room within the anticipated paid parking revenues to make that happen sooner rather than in the nebulous future.
Okay.
Right, that was the nub of my question. Councillor McCallum.
So two things I actually wanted to share on this item in terms of ridership, and then an answer, well, not an answer, but sort of a helper to your question. So Canmore Local Service, in our most recent agenda from regional or from transit, was that there was a ridership jump of 60.7% in the month of February. And you won't see that in my, because we have our meetings literally the day after our COW report is due, so those won't be the most recent numbers that you receive in the COW report. But I guess in terms of justifying ridership, there was a 60% jump in ridership in February from 2019 of February. But we, in our most recent meeting, realized $80,000, I think was the round number, in surplus. Mostly
1,000?
from, pardon me?
1,000?
80,000.
80,000.
80,000 in surplus, and every year as we budget, our budgeting numbers become slimmer and slimmer, so that surplus every year has become slimmer and slimmer, and that surplus is coming from regional. It's performing very,
Right.
very well, so
Right.
it's basically subsidizing other routes, and it has been up to this point basically subsidizing our Canmore local free transit route up to this point. I guess what I'm trying to say is, outside of paid parking revenues, there are other small chunk revenues, and increasing time is a lot cheaper than putting a second bus on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm just thinking, given the increasing ridership, which is obviously our target, to make the bus less convenient at times of the day, maybe it's not that much, maybe there's not that much demand, and so every hour and a half is adequate. I just don't want to, I don't want to start discouraging people or squashing the enthusiasm for the sake of well, it's $30,000, not chump change.
Sorry, Your Worship, are you on like page 26, so item 8 under potential future? Are we talking about the same thing?
It's there, and it's also referenced on page 3 of 5 under number 3, 70 going to,
Right.
70-minute frequency between the hours of 10 and 3:30. And then that's also referenced in 2 other places.
Right, okay.
So I just, if there's, I can't get the answer I want because Mr. Bean's not here.
Yeah, I actually wondered if we could just have this represented in the future, because I think all of this information is important, and it's better when it's iterative.
Or, we can reach out. I can send that question to Mr. Bean myself and satisfy my curiosity, and other councillors can do that with specific questions. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'm not sure where you're getting an hour and a half, because what's being proposed here is the traditional route has been 60 minutes, and what's being proposed is a 70-minute route to encompass a bit of that time lag that we're having with congestion, et cetera. For the upgrade to a 35-minute route, we would be looking at $30,000.
I thought it was an hour.
No, 70 minutes is only 10 minutes after.
Yeah, right.
So we're looking in
I thought
order
it was more
to.
frequently than that.
Well, 70 minutes is an hour plus 10 minutes, and
Right.
this is what we're having difficulty
Currently, it's
with.
only
60 minutes,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So they're hoping to add a little padded time in there to mitigate the problems that we have with traffic congestion in the summer,
Yeah.
where the routes get behind. People they're believing that it will be better for people to know that the route will be at this particular time, even if it has to be 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
So the 35-minute is only half of that time. That's what we would be paying for.
Great, I appreciate that.
Thank you. I was trying to figure out what he was.
I had it in mind that the buses were more frequent than an hour at that time.
Yeah, they're currently 60 minutes. But
Right, okay.
But if you notice, Your Worship, like the incremental increases, like if you're adding a second route, it becomes a huge expense, but when you're just adding an hour at a time, it's just basically an extra hour of driving and the driver and the capital cost of that. So
Okay.
it's an easy way to incrementally add service less expensively
Right.
and be more flexible.
Okay, thanks, both of you. One other question or thought I was going to throw out was, again, on page 5, potential future. I don't know if this is under financial impacts, I guess it is. There's a reference to the intersection at 10th Street and Railway Avenue, signal phasing modification, split phasing for pedestrian vehicular. Just wondering if that would be an intersection where we might consider trialing a scramble crosswalk, or is that outrageously silly? You don't know? Okay, just a question. Are there any other questions on that report? Seeing none, we'll move on to item D2. No burning questions on my part. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll move on then to item D3, the pool closure debrief. Gentlemen? It's a tag team. I guess it is.
Mayor Borman, members of council, I'm here today with my lovely assistant, Stephen Hannes, manager of facilities. We're going to report on the January and February 2020 closure of the Aquatic Center at Elevation Place, what caused this disruption, how it impacted operations, the impact on EP members, the general community, the challenges experienced by our staff, what we learned, what we have done to avoid further disruptions in the future, and how we have modified our service disruption guidelines. What triggered the closure? December 29th, 2019, our aquatic center staff reported eye irritation, coughing, tightness in their chest, dizziness, and nausea. Following these reports, we took a series of actions to ensure the health and safety of our members, guests, and staff. These actions resulted in a number of operational adjustments and periodic partial and full facility closures as corrective and precautionary measures. Through investigations, we determined that chloramines were accumulating in the airspace and were likely causing the symptoms the staff was experiencing. What are chloramines? Chloramines are a chemical byproduct formed when chlorine reacts with nitrogen. Normally in a pool environment, that's sweat from bodies, urine, and ammonia in the water. One particular type of chloramine called trichloramine, which evaporates from the water, gives you that typical chlorine smell you often smell at aquatic centers. Chloramines are effective disinfectants and have been used in potable water systems in North America since 1900. Why is there an issue with air quality? Pool environments are impacted by many variables which require a fine balance. When that balance is disrupted, poor air quality can result. This situation isn't unique to Elevation Place. Many facilities struggle to maintain air and water quality. The facility has to operate within a very narrow range to provide a comfortable and safe environment. Air and water temperatures, air volume, humidity, and water chemistry all have impact. As these factors are often impacted as well by outdoor air temperatures, particularly this extremely warm or extremely cold weather. Humidity, bather loads, even the number of play features operating in a leisure pool have impact. Studies have shown that chloramine levels can vary widely. Testing and consultation with experts concluded that the air handling system and water chemistry both contributed to poor air quality. Changes were made to both the air handling system and the chemistry, and Stephen will detail that in a couple of minutes. Why are we seeing all these issues now? Although the aquatic center is operated reliably 12 hours a day, 364 days per year for the past 7 years, it has sporadically experienced poor air quality, which occasionally resulted in short closures, but always went away in short order. These disruptions were generally attributed to extremely high or extreme low ambient temperatures. Examples include the failure of an exhaust fans on 2 different occasions in 2019, which shut us down for a period of time. In retrospect, air quality issues have been an irritant since the opening of the facility. They were largely ignored because they didn't persist, and up until recently, it was impossible to measure chloramines in the air. Over time, the issues have escalated, especially during cold weather, and the staff awareness of the issue has increased, which has improved internal reporting of those issues. We hope the recent corrective actions resolve this issue in the long term. So we've got a timeline here. So starting on December 29, our staff experienced physical issues. January 10th, we closed the hot tub going into a cold weekend as a precautionary measure, thinking that that might make a difference. But unfortunately, on January 13, we had additional poor air quality, symptoms compounding in our staff. On the deck, five lifeguards reporting tightness, difficulty breathing, etc. January 14, we reopened, and in that case, we did not operate the leisure pool, the slide, or any of the features. Did not operate the hot tub to see what that would do, and it did improve operations. But by that same day, by 8:30, we opened at 6 a.m., air quality was good. By 8:30, it had digressed to the point where it was again impacting our staff. So we closed the aquatic center, and it remained closed from the 14th to the 27th. 24th. January 28th, we opened without the hot tub in operation, and this was following a very thorough investigation with which Stephen and his team led into the pool chemistry, the mechanical systems, and also us finding an instrument that we could test chloramines in the air, so all that testing was done. And we adopted a gradual reopening program that allowed us to continue to monitor the air quality and water quality, assess the impact of swimmers. Swimmers are the biggest variable on water quality. And so we were able to slowly add the number of bathers, also limited our staff's time on the deck to fewer hours, shorter day shifts and shorter time on the deck. So we could, and then the different water bodies. So that was the gradual reopening so we could do more analysis. February 4th, the hot tub reopened, and by February 7th, we are again experiencing some poor air quality measured by the new testing system. February 14th, following further testing and investigation, the Aquatic Center reopened, minus the hot tub, and we've continued, our testing basically concluded at that point that the air handling system was operating at max capacity and as designed, probably better than had ever been configured since opening. But there were still some ongoing issues with pool chemistry, which we are continuing to evaluate. And March 3rd, the hot tub reopened, so it returned to full operation of all facilities. Aquatic centers usually operate at air temperatures around 30 degrees Celsius and humidity levels 50% or higher. There are times when it is difficult to maintain these ideal air quality targets, and operational procedures are implemented to adapt, such as shutting down features in the pool, in the leisure pools, shutting down the slides, turning off the hot tub and the jets, or mitigating activities of our staff, including shorter rotations on the deck, shorter overall shifts, different locations on the deck, because air quality differs. In particular, it tends to be worse next to the hot tub. What was different with this closure is that staff had new symptoms that required medical attention. These symptoms led to 6 filings with workers' comp about issues. Internally, we identified these events as potentially serious incidents and chose to submit a report to Alberta Occupational Health and Safety. An OHS officer was assigned to conduct an investigation. The officer noted that the town was operating responsibly, thorough in our investigation and corrective measures. Oh, thanks, Stephen. While we're open to solutions, no orders were issued by the officer, which is, I believe, is a testament to the diligence of our staff have taken in prioritizing the health and safety of the staff and members. Although chloramines are thought to be the cause of eye and respiratory irritations, up until recently, there was no technology available to test that. And there are, at this time, still no OH&S guidelines about chloramines and how much is acceptable levels. There are some guidelines out of the province of British Columbia, and so we've adopted those. So now Stephen's going to tell you a bit more about the mechanical side.
Thanks, Jim.
Perfect.
This is a snapshot of what our air handling system looks like. This is taken from our automated building management system. This is what our staff and contracted services look at on a daily basis. Air coming in, getting heated, getting moved around by the fans, and recirculating and through the system, that sort of thing. I'll show you this particular feature right here. This is the heat wheel. I'll be talking about that in a minute here, and just notice that there's bypass ducts around that heat wheel that allows the air to go through the system. Okay. So the Aquatic Center is designed with a standalone air handling system. This is done so that to prevent the cross-contamination of the air to the other parts of the building. Given the large size of the aquatic center, there are significant opportunities to create efficiencies within the system, ultimately reducing energy consumption. However, at times these settings struggle or compete with one another when we're expecting the system to produce both indoor air quality at an excellent high standard, but also to maximize energy efficiencies. So although the system is automated and generally works as designed, it requires constant monitoring and adjustments made by our skilled technicians and contracted support services. The air handling system is being monitored by temperature and air humidity levels. These are constantly being monitored and adjusted accordingly. On the coldest and most humid days of the year, generally pose the most challenging to the system. These are also happen to be the busiest days of the year in terms of occupancy loads. So this is a constant struggle on those kinds of days. So the ideal indoor air temperature is about 30 degrees Celsius. It's influenced also by diurnal changes in temperatures on the outside, but as the sun penetrates into the building, it creates fluctuations within the aquatic center as well. Outside it can go as low as minus 30, so creating a 60-degree temperature differential. It's no small feat to get the outside air constantly at a stable temperature of that ideal 30 degrees Celsius. From an indoor air humidity perspective, the target is to maintain the air humidity at below 50%. And again, the outdoor air humidity can fluctuate greatly from day to day and from season to season, ranging from 0 to 100%. This is also influenced by bather loads, place features, and the hot tub use and those kinds of things. There is no actual dehumidification equipment in the facility, so although we try our best to maintain humidity levels, it does fluctuate from time to time, but we do manipulate it by changing the amount of outdoor air coming in, the number of play features that are in use, and those kinds of things. The air exchange is another important feature that we're constantly monitoring. The amount of air that is being recirculated in the system versus being expelled and brought in as well is constantly in a state of balance, and it's that balance of trying to maximize efficiency and that ideal temperature ranges and humidity ranges is constantly being adjusted. So we conducted 3 main investigations through since the beginning of the year. The first being the physical system investigation, where physical inspections were taken on site, both by our technical staff and contracted services. During these inspections, we did find a damper that was malfunctioning. And like Jim mentioned in the past, where we had a physical maintenance issue that caused a direct impact to the air quality, we thought this was going to be the main factor. This damper was deeply buried, difficult to find, and not regularly monitored with our automated system, so it went undetected. This resulted in a reduced amount of air exchange within the system. So this was likely a significant cause of the air quality issues around the new year, but once we repaired it, we were expecting the air quality to instantly improve. It did for a while, but it wasn't a permanent solution. So we conducted further investigations. So we looked at the airflow. We brought in experts, we added sensors to test the system, and we looked at the turnover rates between the indoor and outdoor air exchange. What we did find was that there was a restriction in the system. So this is that heat wheel. Basically, it's designed to exchange heat from the air that's leaving the system, going out of the building this way. It heats this rotating wheel that's highly conductive, and as it rotates into this other duct, it preheats the air coming into the building. It's an efficiency measure. What we found is that on the inside of this heat wheel, the air coming in was restricted more than expected, more than designed standards. So this heat wheel has since been taken out of use. It's still present, but we're just not using it, and we're actually allowing the air to come in and bypass that whole system through these ducts that go around the heat wheel. Okay, so right now the system is now bringing in much more fresh air. It's way less restricted, but it is running less efficiently. So our boiler system is working more vigorously to get to the proper temperatures. And the third investigation was a programming investigation. So we did go back to the original engineers to see if the system was actually designed properly. Are additional mechanical systems to be added, enhanced, changed? And the answer was a no, which is a good thing. Mechanical systems, especially in pool environments, are extremely expensive, so any modifications would have been extremely expensive, but also highly disruptive to the pool programming and that kind of thing. Within those engineered parameters, there's a range of upper and lower thresholds. And the automated system is set somewhere within those parameters. There's room to move and adjust through the seasons and through those kinds of things. So with the new information that we discovered, the automated systems have been reprogrammed, and once the new sensors that test the airflow behind this heat wheel are installed, that program will be added into the automated building management system. So switching gears to the pool water chemistry, this is the other part of the equation. Whatever happens in the water will eventually impact what's happening in the air. They're interlinked. So as Jim alluded to, there are a number of sources of contamination of the water, and it's largely due to bathers themselves. We also discovered that some of our cleaning chemicals also contain a bit of ammonia, which is not unusual in many cleaners that you use. But there's nitrogen in there that could be a potential source of reaction with the chlorine, causing those trichloramines. So our system is vigorously cleaned on a regular basis. There's a number of systems in place using the chlorine chemical, ultraviolet light, acid, physical filters, as well as physical water replacement. The pH, chlorine, and residual total dissolved solids are regularly monitored, and the good news is that these are clearly legislated and set by clear industry standards. What's different is the lack of ability, until very recently, to test those chloramines. This is the equipment that's used to test for chloramines. We found a contractor to bring that in and test the air quality. This was also used to test whether or not our adjustments that we've been doing over the last several months are actually working or not. Given that the main issue in this instance was the eye irritation and respiratory irritation among staff, we're quite confident that the chloramines were the key issue, and finding a way to test for that was what was missing to date, and what we're thankful that we were able to find. And many of the reopenings and closures that we had over the last, since the new year, were based on the results that came from these chloramine testing. Now we're able to get the piece of equipment and do it in-house. This will increase the turnover rate from the test results, and we're able to do more tests more affordably. So we're quite happy about this. And the silver lining in all of this is that the industry likely is paying attention to what's happening here. And just like with the ammonia testing, prior to the life cycle maintenance project, we are ahead of the curve, we believe, in terms of addressing the health and safety of our staff and finding new ways to ensure the safety in our recreation facilities. So we've done a number of different adjustments to that pool water quality. We have a number of different protocols already in place that are helpful, and we've now discontinued the deck cleaners that contain ammonia. So together with the air handling system adjustments as well as the pool chemicals, we believe we not only have gained some short-term results, but also some long-term results as well to hopefully ensure that we have a safe environment for everybody. I'll pass it back to Jim to talk about service recovery.
Thank you, Stephen. So between January 14th and February 13th, The aquatic center was basically closed 20 full days. And so for the first time, we were looking at how do we make that right with our membership and users. Every Elevation Place member signs a membership agreement. And these agreements include the following 3 clauses. The town shall have the right to close specific amenities or the entire facility for repairs and special events as it deems necessary or appropriate. 2, the town will give advance notice of closures due to special events and planned maintenance. However, repairs and maintenance to ensure the safety of patrons may be done without notice. Programs and services provided as part of an Elevation Place membership may change from time to time at the sole discretion of the town without partial and or full reimbursement of membership fees. The town has not chosen to use those clauses in this case and are instead looked at a compensation program. Actually, some time ago, we adopted what we call our service recovery guideline, and it basically advises staff how to deal with service disruptions. And so we referenced that when we had our service disruption on January 14th. And basically what the model told us is Go Beyond and Splash members would be given the option to put their memberships on hold. So basically just extend out to the end of their membership, the disruption period. And a number of, I think we had about 70 members took advantage of that option in the first couple of weeks. The model, a hold or an extension provides basically a full credit for the term of the service disruption. In response to feedback from council and the general public, we subsequently made some modifications to that plan as the duration increased. We gave Splash members the option to actually maintain their memberships, but instead use them to access fitness aspects of the facility, and a number of members took advantage of that. We also offered to put their memberships on hold retroactive to January 14th, and that increased, I think that brought us to about 170 holds registered in the system. Upon further feedback from council, etc., we commenced the development of a rebate program and started looking at that, a program that would offer cash refunds to all members for the closure period. We investigated a number of options to provide a rebate program, each one made challenging by the limitations of our software system and our large membership. After careful deliberation, consultation with our software provider, and testing, working with IT, we decided to move forward with an online rebate program. The online rebate program was launched yesterday and is available now on our town website. So members can go on, access a form, and submit their request for a rebate. It will take some time, up to probably a couple of months, because we need to do them all as a large batch, and we've allowed them till the end of the month to make those submissions, and then it'll take a while for us to process. But the process has started to get the rebates out. We then revisited our service recovery model and made some modifications so it would better be more suitable to future closures. We were quite confident that no more unplanned closures were likely. We even went so far as to contemplate a full closure of the entire facility. What a ridiculous premise that is. How could we ever have a full closure? What we have dubbed the Elevation Place Service Level Assurance Plan. Here, and I've got copies for council. So this little chart basically is our guideline for what to do in the case of service disruptions in the future. It considers planned versus unplanned events, identifies minimum disruption periods, which would trigger a level of compensation, and considers each individual venue within AP. So we've got that would include climbing, aquatics, fitness, although most of our closures revolve around aquatics, you never know, or as I said, even looking at the whole building. And we've determined that when looking at the total service, so a Go Beyond member who has access to all of Elevation Place, we would value each of those main facilities, climbing, aquatics, and fitness, as basically a third of the benefit. So as we're looking at rebates to Go Beyond members for this recent disruption, the rebate would be equivalent to a third of their membership fee, prorated by the number of days they were unable to use it, so the 20-day period. For planned closures, 2 to 4 weeks in length, like our annual pool shutdown, we will offer proactive membership holds for the predetermined time frame. As you can see, a rebate program will only be initiated in future unplanned closures that exceed 10 or more days. We feel this plan is fair and reasonable. It will become a fully transparent component of the information package, so everybody will know when they buy their membership that this is the deal, and exceeds service standards we could find at any comparable facilities. We couldn't find a similar facility in the private or public sector offering cash rebates for membership. Most offer no considerations, and some provide credits, but we'll see what happens in this latest world. For this current closure, there's no need for members to request a hold. The guideline dictates that all members will be entitled to an automatic extension of their membership for the full amount of the days of the disruption. So that's what we're doing for the next disruption period, which started this week. We're very interested in hearing from council on this plan and that it properly reflects what we want in our community. We believe it is fair, it's transparent, and establishes a new best practice. Community impacts of the closure, we average about 500 swimmers a day, and of course they were denied access to the facility. Big impact on our aquatic user groups, in particular Bow Valley Riptide Swim Club. 2,724 Go Beyond memberships. Now those are memberships, so a membership may contain a number of individuals within it, in a family case or in a couple. And 240 splash memberships were unable to fully utilize the facility. And as of our latest date, we currently have 270 holds that members have requested for that period of time. So it's a little less than 10% of the membership is actually requested a hold on their membership. Financial impacts, the last number there wasn't available when this was put together, but that's about another $5,000. So we're looking at about $40,000 worth of revenue to recreation services that's lost. Now that does not include memberships, which will be the big chunk. And on the expense side for Stephen's team, they were looking at least about $70,000, not including their staff time and all of that, but in consultant fees and testing, etc., about $70,000. So our next steps are detailed here. A lot of them are working with Stephen's team, and the rebate program at the bottom, which is we're moving forward with now. So I would invite your questions.
Thank you. It's tricky to keep up with you. a lot of information thrown at us, but I appreciate you bringing the report to council. And I have a few questions that maybe I misunderstood what you said or just need some clarification on. So backing up a bit, Mr. Hannes, you were talking about the heat wheel and indicated that essentially you've just bypassed the wheel, so it's not part of the system at this time. But I missed what you said would happen in the future with that part of the equipment.
So right now the heat wheel will continue to be in place, but it'll just be, the air will be bypassed using the ducts that go around the heat wheel. So we may revisit that in the future.
Okay.
but at this time, we'll continue. We want to get the air quality and consistent air quality in the building, and perhaps reevaluate this at a later date.
Okay, so effectively the heat wheel, unless something changes, you'll act as though it's not there.
Correct.
There's no repair or whatever. The hot tub draining monthly rather than yearly, was that factored? No, that's not factored into the financial impact you referenced. What is that impact cost-wise of draining that 12 times instead of one?
Not too much, actually. The main cost is in heating the water. The water itself, we don't charge ourselves for that water. So there's additional chemical and heating to go into draining the pool. We don't have a dollar value tied to that right now, but we could estimate that at a later date if you like.
Doesn't matter, really. I'm just curious about, so why is it we only do it once a year? Does it just take a long time, or?
We're doing it twice a year now. It's based on our initial recommendations, and so we with our investigations through other facilities, there's a range from annual to monthly, and so we've chosen to go to the other end of the spectrum and do it monthly now. We do replace the water on a regular basis, on a partial replacements throughout the year. But the full drain, drained each month is the new plan to ensure that top quality water in there.
And I'm trying to remember, but I can't, from the last tour we had in the bowels of the building. Is the hot tub looped into its own filter, or does it filter?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's being continually filtered.
Correct.
Right. Mr. Juncker, the financial impact that you referenced on one of your last slides, $40,000, that's just, as I understood you, just revenue at the front desk rather than the impact of rebates on memberships?
That's correct, yeah. The membership rebate will be much higher than just the daily revenues, yes.
Right. And you don't have any sort of guess because it's too early on the...
It would be somewhere in the range of around 150,000, I'm guessing.
That's if every member...
Yeah, that would require every member to submit, that's right. When we did some modeling on it where we looked at if 50% of Go Beyond members and Splash members actually apply, then we'd be looking at somewhere in the range of 60 to 70,000.
Okay, thank you. So the online rebate program just launched yesterday.
That's correct.
And I'm not sure, do you have like email for all members, or is that just notice people get through the grapevine or on our town website, or?
Yes, we have a newsletter which most members subscribe to, and we get a pretty high opening rate on those. And then at the front desk we have that information as well. But it's available on the website, yeah, and our expectation is that people will find it there.
It's pretty likely people will get the message.
Yes.
Do you have something to add?
I had a question, if you would...
Go ahead, throw it out there.
Just because this was all somewhat new, because we didn't have a report, and I thank you very much. There was reference several times to the bather load and the bather, urine, showering, sweat, people coming, either off the climbing wall or out of the gym directly into the pool without showering. I have heard and read articles about the importance of showering and not just, the quick dip and dash, but actually with soap and water. Are we doing anything to enforce that so that kids that take lessons are marched back into the shower, or people are sent back into the showers before getting into the pool?
Yes, we've charged our deck staff with encouraging people, particularly like coming out of the steam room and heading for the hot tub, those sorts of things, to getting them to shower first. And we've looked at a wider program around education, particularly for our members who use it the most. And we did that shortly after Elevation Place opened. We had a lot of problem with fecals, with children not having the swim diapers on, etc. And we did a good effort at education of our membership on that, and we've had much less as a result, and now we have to do the same thing. We didn't want to tie it too closely to the pool reopening, so it would appear that we were blaming our members for it, but certainly the biggest factor in the water quality, and I think Stephen will concur, is the people. Yeah, that's why it's so difficult to test on these things, because until you put people in, you don't have the chemical reactions. So.
Good question. Comment away?
Sorry, just one. I've seen some pretty explicit signage, that is life size with wash here, wash here. And I think a lot of it comes from Iceland, where they have a lot of public baths and in Europe. So anyways, you can look at that online.
Right at the end, you talked about the next disruption period starting this week, which we don't know how long that disruption will go on. Are you suggesting, or you're not suggesting, that there'd be rebates for this current closure, or are you?
Yeah. If we follow our guideline, we basically, every member started their hold period the day we closed on Monday. And so going forward, and we're pretty sure it's going to be more than 10 days, so therefore everyone will be entitled to a credit on their account or an extension in time of their membership at the end of the closure period.
And is that going to happen automatically, or they still have to apply?
No, that will happen automatically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there other questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks for bringing the report. I did have one other question. Prior to the current closure, I mean, in all these issues, the health of our staff has to take uppermost importance. So before the decision to close the pool and all, was that today? Yesterday? Was the health of our staff, noticeably improved? Were things working for the staff with the changes that were adopted?
Yeah. So we were getting we were asked staff to do constant log checks, so with their symptoms, and also the deck temperature, humidity, variety of monitoring on the deck that was enhanced in addition to the chloramine testing. And so the reports were quite good from the staff, and we would have enhanced the closures or extended the closures if it was otherwise. And the chloramine testing confirmed that we were getting good results of air quality, and that the work that we had done was working, so that was good.
That's good to hear. Thanks very much for being here. Move on into E1. Councillor Updates. I missed that. Is there a high five or something? Oh, elbow. Okay, council updates. The usual format. Any questions from councillor to council on there? Well, Councillor McCallum's the only one that filed a report. So.
You're welcome. To be fair, I didn't file one for the 2 months prior.
Yeah.
To be fair, I didn't file one for 2 months prior.
That was your mea culpa, was it?
Yep.
Okay. So I have a question. It's about the tax requisition and BVRH. The decrease is mostly due to incremental cost recovery through the Lodge Rent Geared to Income program, and most recently cuts to provincial grants. So the cuts to provincial grants would add costs to the facility, right?
No, we just cut, like, the grant, whatever whatever expenses it was attached to, we cut.
Oh, so the grant money that was funding certain operations, you're just not doing the operations?
Yep.
I see. So, okay, that helps me understand that.
But then also, I just wanted to point out from when you and I started on Bovet Valley Regional Housing in 2011, it used to be a 60% requisition, and now it's well below that. So that is part and parcel of the rent geared to income program, and we knew that was going to take 4 or 5 years for it to sort of show what it was really going to look like. So,
Yeah, no, definitely showing success, which is great. Any other questions for Councillor McCallum? See none, we'll move on to service area reports. F1. I have a comment, not a question, but just the provincial budget reduction to reduce or eliminate the work that we did for CRPS is unfortunate. It was not a lot of cost, but it certainly provided a lot of benefit to the kids, so that was disappointing to see, though we knew it was coming. I'm just confirming in the, there's a reference to the March 23rd scientists from Global Water Futures presentation. That's cancelled now, correct? Right? And I'm just running ahead. Anybody's got any questions or comments, hit your button. Just a note under facilities, section C, the Northview staff accommodation rental unit, noted the town transferred the unit to CCHC, and at the last board meeting, we were informed that that unit's already been rented to a PH qualified applicant. I have a question. At the very end of the facilities report, at the end of section E, now it talks about the total energy output. This is in regards to the 933 modules, will remain in the same at 373 kilowatts DC. Is that, what's that mean, DC? What does that mean, that whole bit?
I'm not 100% sure, but direct current, I don't know. That's what I would have guessed.
Yeah, that's what I would guess.
That's what I guessed, but oh well.
I can confirm with Stephen.
Yeah, it's just, you know, yeah, whatever.
The MCCAC stands for Municipal Center for Climate Action.
There you go.
Change, I think.
And I missed that acronym. Under the Public Works, the information that the Trans-Canada Trail Society has stepped away from the ownership and maintenance of the trail kiosk, passing ownership and maintenance of it to the town. Do you know if we were consulted in any way on that?
No, I don't know.
Again, not a big deal, just curious.
I would guess that it could come down if we didn't want to take over the maintenance and ownership of it. But
I'm sure we'll just absorb it.
Yep.
And it's not a lot of money, I'm certain. It's just curious if they consult.
the money will come when it needs to be replaced in several years'
Yeah.
time and starts
Well,
to show.
taking it down would be more cost than just maintaining it for now.
Mhm.
And it's not something I would suggest we should take down.
No.
It's important to have that there. Okay, that's all I've got. Anybody else have questions, comments? Seeing none, Councillor Sanford, you gotta hit the button.
I'm sorry. I just also wanted to confirm that the art walks that were in conjunction with World Cup are not going to take place, is that correct? The art walk through the...
Or the art walk?
Yeah.
The organized art walks?
Yeah, the temporary
I think,
exhibit.
I'm not 100% sure. I believe those were canceled likely with the World Cup event cancellation.
The art walk is
The
in
art
place.
walk remains
The art
in
walk
place.
is available to the
Yeah.
public, but there was a guided...
There were
on,
some guided tours that were going to be part of the
Right.
World Cup. I think that was to get people up to and home
Yeah.
from the event. Yeah,
March 20th or 22nd, there were going to be some guided tours.
right, right.
Okay.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah, that would be my guess, but I could confirm that for
Okay.
sure, yeah.
Anything else on the service area reports? Seeing none, looking at item G1, the council resolution action list. It occurs to me, I can't remember if the rest of council is aware of this, but we have a new process at Agenda Review where Agenda Review Committee looks at recent, actually the municipal clerk looks at recent motions and recommends whether or not they go onto this tracking list. Because we found over time we just was random what we were tracking. So there's going to be more consideration in regards to what goes onto the tracking list. That's just for information. Is there anybody with any questions about any of those specific motions? Councillor Sandbridge, you're going to hit your button late? Okay. With that then, I will move the council be, or committee of the whole be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.